Pluto's presence in a house brings a kind of perpetual motion to the affairs of that house, a dying and rising, a destruction and regeneration. Pluto brings repeated confrontations with the truth. If you meet the truth, it will bring you deeper and deeper into the center of your power. If you ignore Pluto's challenges, your power weakens and life becomes painful. Pluto is considered a difficult planet in part because you only get the power you work for. That power comes directly from awareness of yourself, the good, the bad, and the ugly. As with death, there is no negotiation. You either master Pluto, or Pluto finds a million ways to master you. Pluto brings the same maneuvers to everyone, colored by two things, sign and house. The sign shows the way Pluto behaves. The house shows the area of life in which Pluto has the greatest influence. We're looking at Pluto in all the houses of the wheel, continuing now with the second quadrant, houses 4, 5, and 6. The IC is the lowest angle, the midnight position in the wheel. It represents our deepest roots, our deepest past, and the deepest self-image. When the shadowy planet Pluto is here, we usually see a person who is born into a complicated emotional situation when it comes to family of origin, which creates a petrifying fear of abandonment. Pluto is the planet of survival instincts, don't forget. As infants, we have needs that must be met by caretakers or we die. As adults, we seem to be able to get by alone in modern times, but it didn't used to be that way. Early Homo sapiens could not survive alone. Without the tribe, we died. Pluto is like a lizard brain. It remembers this reality and brings it into close familial relationships. The family life of Pluto in the 4th is typically heavy. I don't know that I've ever heard a Pluto in the 4th say convincingly that they came from a carefree home or a happy family with parents that loved the children and loved each other. When there are two parents, we usually see one who's controlling and one who's more sympathetic but covertly manipulative and of no real help. There are usually lots of undercurrents in the native's home, particularly an undercurrent of resentment. The most common type of resentment surrounds the child's dependency, the child's natural needs. You also see a theme of abandonment. Perhaps the parents literally abandon the child, or perhaps abandonment is a threat that hangs in the air as a way to control behavior. Because Pluto is associated with death, we might also find a person who is abandoned by the death of a parent, or who's from a family that was, as a group, deeply affected by an important family death. When Pluto's in the fourth house, the relationships with parents are very emotional and very private. There's often an over-dependence on parents. In the darkest part of the chart, this isn't always easy to recognize and even harder to tease out. Families collude. And Pluto in the fourth comes up with some pretty interesting ways to remain dependent. The main trouble with dependency, in my view, is that it creates adults who don't know and can't express their real needs. They end up not knowing what their desires are. And not knowing your desires means trouble with direction in life. Later, they go into relationships in which they feel suffocated because they're not saying what they need, they're not getting what they need, and yet they're giving as much as they can. When Pluto is involved, that giving can become compulsive. Pluto is also prone to extremes, and in this water house, those are emotional by nature. Emotional reactions seem to come out of the blue, but that's only because the triggers are mysterious. This subterranean flow can be seen best during transits to Pluto in the fourth and transits to the IC. As planets pass, there are eruptions. There's a release of energy, a release of life force. This can be immensely creative or immensely troubling. Pluto at this angle brings frustrating and confusing emotional experiences. I've said before that Pluto at an angle reflects a Plutonic personality, and Plutonic people have some insight into the necessity of dark and painful experiences because of the transformation they bring. The more time a native has spent in despair and powerlessness, the more comfortable they are with Pluto. A painful divorce can lead to a life of wealth and freedom, depending upon how a person plays it. Grueling experiences can bring you deep into your heart's desire. Pluto's placement refers to the desires of the soul, the evolution life has in store, the fate that's curled up inside the native like a sacred scroll. As much as the ego might fight evolution, it's Pluto's job to bring it anyway. I've noticed that the more we resist, the more critical learning experiences have to become. In other words, when wake-up calls are ignored, Pluto just uses a higher gear. Pluto can use rough tactics in pursuit of growth, but one thing is guaranteed. The truly transformative experiences in life aren't voluntary. We may go, but it's usually kicking and screaming. When in the fourth, Pluto tends to use family, clan, tradition, and connections to the past to promote that growth. The plain truth is that being surrounded by a difficult family is a good way for Pluto to inspire a search for the self. In this water house, family can be a sea of troubles, but there's also a strong sense that they've been born into the right family for the destiny they must meet. Not surprisingly, There's usually a lot of unfinished business here. These natives bring people into their lives who are just like their parents. Pluto loves repeated experiences, pushing the same themes over and over until it can no longer be ignored. And so, gritty as it may be, these surrogates end up teaching lessons that bring personal power. We become powerful by sorting out what causes pain. Across a lifetime, Pluto's greatest concern in the fourth is inner security. If family life is a struggle, the native is forced to dig into the darkest chambers of the self to find peace. Once it's healed, Pluto in the fourth means a steely foundation. It means an unshakable, unconscious self-image. This Pluto also loves being part of a gathering. When they find personal stability, they begin drawing in people who are influential in a positive way. This leads to an ever deeper sense of personal power. As for the dark side, Pluto in the fourth and at the IC can be extremely self-centered, like a child, like an infant. Sometimes they pretend to be weak for the sake of attention. There's also a tendency to go into relationships where they fluctuate between being controlled and being controlling. The underbelly here is manipulating others to feel dependent upon them in order to gain the upper hand. That always comes with a persistent fear of abandonment. It isn't a competition, but this may be the most serious and difficult placement for Pluto in the wheel. The point of the fifth is finding what's unique and special about the self. Why is locating the real you such a difficult prospect? Because we're drawn away from who we really are in 1,000 ways from the moment of birth. That's called being socialized. Some socialization is necessary, but some damages the true self, and each individual must sort that out for themselves. Pluto in the fifth natives have an especially intense experience of this process, so they have to know what individuality is and what it means. This can be quite a dramatic road. Let's start with the fifth as the house of creativity. Creative work is here because it reflects who you really are, the essence of you. It's an unedited, unadulterated version of the self. Now, not everyone with Pluto in the fifth engages in a creative discipline. Some never do anything creative, not even going so far as to draw a stick figure or play a note. It isn't that they aren't in touch with their creativity. It doesn't exist. In this case, their experience of Pluto in the fifth will focus on the other aspects of this house. But those who do artistic and performance work find darkness the moment they start digging around for material. A good example of this placement is Edgar Allan Poe. Much of his work is chilling. Considered the horror of his time, you can see Pluto's macabre psychological energy coming through his writing. Think of the shadow of the raven against the wall in a Gothic hallway, a guilty heart beating under the floorboards, a story straight from a demon in the narrator's head. How about the eerie love poem, Annabel Lee? Neither the angels in heaven above, nor the demons down under the sea can ever dissever my soul from the soul of the beautiful Annabel Lee. And all the night tide I lie down by the side of my darling, my life and my bride, in a sepulchre by the sea, in a tomb by the sounding sea. You can feel this poem bubbling up from the depths of Pluto in the oceanic sign of Pisces. Sign does color creative output, but having Pluto in this house at all means that self-expression comes from inner tension and an inner pressure being released. This can feel like a matter of life and death, but Pluto in the fifth thrives on it. The real torture only comes when life is mediocre. You see, these natives feel they have a special destiny to fulfill. Pluto in this house demands that these natives guide their own fate, take control of their own evolution, write their own script, and most importantly, star in their own life. In the end, a self-expressive discipline doesn't matter much. Creatives and non-creatives are both required to answer the same question: who am I? Pluto forces this question over and over throughout a lifetime by giving these natives extended periods of not knowing who they are. Transits to Pluto in the fifth bring critical moments of not knowing, and that causes a frenzy of digging to find out. The next topic to cover in this segment of the wheel is romance. Significant commitments are in houses 7 and 8, but romance is in the fifth because it is, in essence, play. What do we get when we mix the house of romantic play with the god of the dead? Romance takes on a serious tone. Eroticism and sex can be a form of recreation for Pluto in the fifth. They might explore the erotic corners of life as others go to a trivia night at the bar. They're drawn to the sport of sex, the game of seduction. Pluto loves to be fascinated, hypnotized, mesmerized. It also easily falls into obsession. So Pluto in the fifth is prone to a state we call limerence. This means being obsessed by or infatuated with another person. These feelings tend to be overwhelming and contain a strong desire for the limerence to go both ways. It rarely does. But Pluto still brings obsessive attachments. Without this person, I will die is an unpleasant thought over the long term. This placement is also likely to say that a romantic relationship saved their life, or that their trajectory was changed by a romantic partner. Another issue related to the fifth is children. There are three facets to this: the native's experience of their own children, the experience of having been a child, and the experience of the inner child. The inner child is a level of awareness where we're capable of guiltless play. This is fully alive in happy people. Pluto in the fifth reports having to fight tooth and nail for that inner child. They have to exhume, unfreeze, and revive this aspect of the psyche. Like the goddess Demeter, who searched for her daughter Persephone until winter was created, these natives must find an inner child that was, in some fashion, taken to the underworld. The part of you that plays freely can be damaged by a lot of things. Fifth house Plutos usually report being overly controlled by their parents. The actress Drew Barrymore is an interesting example of Pluto in the fifth. She had a drug-addicted father and a stage mother who hovered terribly. Her brand of hovering included drinking and smoking with Drew from a very young age. Drew would be kept home from school in order to party in style with the upper echelon at Studio 54. Special memories. Later, Drew would admit how unprepared she was for those experiences, but she was pushed, one might say subducted, into an underworld of fun. Fun that rides the edge of destruction is often found with Pluto in House 5. And in her case, dark childhood thrills led to a self-destructive adulthood. Along with Saturn in the fifth, Pluto in the fifth tends to actively avoid having children of their own. Maybe they don't want to pass on the dysfunction they know would come from their inadequate parenting. Or maybe underneath it all, there's some resentment. Perhaps they don't want to give their own parents the ability to live on through the legacy of grandchildren. Whatever the case, when Pluto is in the fifth, something kills the personal drive to procreate. It was only through Pluto's desire for transformation that Drew was able to change everything she knew to give her two children a relatively normal life. But we can all expect to undergo our most massive transformations in the house where we find Pluto. In the second Earth house, we find daily activity and maintenance of routine. The sixth covers all the things we must attend to in order to live a life, from cleaning and sweeping to working a job, to hygiene and nutrition, to paying bills. Whether we have a home and a typical 9 to 5, or we live in the bushes behind the soup kitchen, there's always maintenance. Loose as these systems may at times be, they always weave together to create a personal daily fabric. Work is the most well-known feature of the sixth. Work supports us, maintains us, and it allows us to keep our daily systems. Without the income brought by work, The systems we find preferable tend to disintegrate. So I think work is where we should begin discussing Pluto's influence. What does a native's work life tend to be like when the planet of power and death and intensity is here? For one, this placement has a flair for going into positions of power. You might find a native who's attracted to walking the halls of power. They're the ones getting cozy with the higher ups in the company. Pluto can be a shark. So one of the lower expressions of this placement is the power-hungry opportunist who'll do anything, say anything, betray anyone to get close to the throne. As the house that covers coworkers, we tend to see trouble with colleagues. This can take many forms. But coworkers bullying and ganging up is one of the distinct possibilities. You see long-term vendettas and betrayals. Perhaps the native finds out that their trusted work friend is actually a backstabber. With this placement, it's never surprising to hear reports of leaving jobs on bad terms socially. The sixth house was, until recently, considered a malefic. Bad luck at work was one of the reasons for this reputation. Since we find resentment where we find Pluto, anger often comes out at work. Pluto here can't help but feel like they're in a lower subservient role. Pluto is never afraid of hard work. Its gritty nature wouldn't complain about the work itself. But what this placement has a problem with is working so hard in exchange for so little and being unrecognized as a matter of course. When it comes to this placement, we also find plutonic jobs. That means jobs that surround crisis, death, and depth. That includes emergency medical services, firefighting, the ER, lifeguarding, and generally risky positions. These natives are also attracted to death, working in hospice or the funerary industry in some way. The planet of depth in the house of employment means jobs that surround investigation, interrogation, violence, and crime. Let's not forget the drilling down that we find with Pluto. This placement is therefore drawn to research, going deeper and deeper into one specific topic. Maybe they go into archaeology or cancer research or even the psychological arts. Sigmund Freud himself had Pluto in the sixth. He was the first to say that the mind is an iceberg. We don't see most of it, but with consistent confrontations with ourselves, we can become aware of what we don't know. With the planet of the unconscious in the house of work, he spent his life creating the foundations of psychoanalysis, which has been a great service to humanity and has alleviated a lot of suffering. Service positions are the best match for Pluto in the sixth, and personal transformations through that service tends to happen when any effort at all is applied. One of the dangers of this obsessive planet is workaholism. That seems like one of the better addictions to have, and maybe it is, but it can bring misery like any other compulsive activity. When workaholics hide at the office, it can appear that they're just being productive and responsible. However, like other addicts, workaholics leave a trail of disappointment and broken promises and feelings of neglect when it comes to the people closest to them. Not to mention the depression that's always present in a workaholic. Any activity that squeezes out the rest of life is dysfunctional. So, what can we expect from Pluto in the house of health? This usually manifests in extremes. That means extremes in diet, extreme exercise routines, extremes in how daily life is undertaken. Maybe they go from self-destructive health habits to a macrobiotic diet. They might go from drinking a bottle of wine a day to being a totally dried out breatharian. We find control issues where we find Pluto, so we might see anorexia or the plutonic purging that goes along with bulimia. Anxiety needs to be funneled somewhere. And in the sixth, it tends to be converted into health issues. This is the house of maintenance. So these natives are either maintaining illness or maintaining health. When Pluto is here, we see a digging into the idea that through a mysterious process, illness can be transformed. Life and death can be controlled through daily habits. Illness is a serious and complex teacher. Health conditions seem to have a drive of their own, using the body as a kind of host. Those with Pluto in the sixth usually think that there's a mysterious place where the body, mind, and soul converge. And if this force is used properly, any illness can be stopped in its tracks. Pluto here likes this idea because it's so powerful. Being able to overcome the illnesses that have plagued humankind for 1,000,000 years is godlike. Pluto in the sixth also predisposes natives to psychosomatic illnesses. By that, I don't mean illnesses that are made up. I mean illnesses that stem from discomfort in the emotional realm. Disappointments at work may turn into the flu. Shingles might flare up during a divorce. Herpes might outbreak during the stress of exam week. However, on the positive side, healing ability itself is born of repeated exposure to illness. We also see extreme transformations in the personality when Pluto in the sixth finds the correct lifestyle or the right job. The worst thing that can happen to this placement is perceiving life as meaningless, thinking of daily existence as cold. This is always where astrologers start talking about finding the sacred aspect in daily life. The medical doctor and spiritual author Deepak Chopra has something to add to this discussion. As a Pluto in the sixth, he spent his professional life investigating the mysterious spiritual forces that contribute to health. How do you know when Pluto is working at its optimal level and the soul is flowing in your daily life? Dr. Chopra says the first indication of a soul-based life is that you stop worrying. The second indication is that you encounter more and more meaningful coincidences to the point where you experience all of life as a miracle. This level of consciousness is the deepest wish of Pluto in the sixth house. It's actually what all of its lessons are for. Thank you for watching Secrets from an Astrologer's Desk. Next is all the ways you can get in touch for a birth chart reading and full astrological services. I'm Joy. Pluto in the third quadrant is next.